Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Paula, and I lead up the communications here at Vax Choice. And we are so happy that you've joined us today for a new series that we're introducing, which is the A to Z Guide to the ADA. And today's focus is how it applies to you. So before we go into this, please join us at vaxchoice.com and please follow us on our social media channels at VaxChoice and subscribe to our newsletter where we send that out 5 days a week. And there's a plethora of information in there that is going to be very handy for sharing with your friends and family and community. So thank you again. Today, we have our host of this new series, which is the Disabled Rights Advocates firm, which is actually the firm that's led up by Todd Callender, who is our founder of Vax Choice. And we have from his team, Certified ADA Advocate, J.V. Shore. Hello, Jay. And we have Chris Pazzula, JD, Administrative Law Specialist.
Hello,
Hi,
everybody.
Chris. Hi, thank you both for joining us. Now, I'll just give a short little intro on Chris and Jay here. And Chris Pazzula, the bulk of Chris's professional experience is in employment and labor law with the federal government. She left the federal government in 2012 and has since been a small business owner, a dog trainer, a citizen lobbyist at the state and national levels. She went to law school, midlife, graduating at the age of 51. Wow, Chris, with her focus on constitutional and common law. Her passion for advocating for those with disabilities was born with watching her virtually successfully navigate her life. Oh, I'm sorry. With watching her visually impaired sister who lost her sight as a teenager due to diabetic retinopathy. Oh, wow, Chris, I didn't know about that. Thank you. Yeah. And she watched. So you watched how she successfully navigated her life. That is amazing. So the last couple of years, Chris has been working for disabled rights advocates, helping people through the process of claiming their rights under the ADA during the COVID vaccine madness. And once I give the stage over to you both, I'm really looking forward to hearing a little bit more about that story. So thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
And Jay Shore is just a guy with an axe to grind. Ironically, he's a professional axe grinder with certifications in ADA advocacy for litigations with invisible disabilities and DVSV survivor rights advocacy. He is adept at bringing the mechanics of the Americans with Disability Acts to the table in a way that causes ulcers for the status quo. Thank you for that, Jay. Jay is a nationwide ADA advocate and interfaith minister. So I think that there's going to be no shortage of humor today in this show, which I'm very much looking forward to, and I'm sure that our community is as well. So Chris and Jay, thanks again for being here, and I turn this over to you. And about halfway through, I'll come back in and we'll see what questions the audience may have. So please drop those questions in the chat, anything you may have about the ADA. Thank you both.
Thank you. Chris, you want me to kick off?
Sure, go ahead.
I'll say that I came into this through not realizing, but later on being diagnosed with that I had social communication disorder for basically all of my life. And there are a lot of sources for that and the CPTSD that I've been diagnosed with. But what happened was I kept running into problems with the system. I couldn't hold jobs. I couldn't do this. I couldn't do that. Every time, in negotiations, things would break down because I would get angry and just cut, I would go straight to, non-communicative patterns. And so finally, after some time, I ran into Dr. Huffer. I was introduced to her by a friend that was on a YouTube channel I was on at the time. And I felt like I'd immediately met a lifelong family member, because trust is hard for me to build. And yet with Dr. Huffer, I had this immediate rapport because she had seen what caused my lack of trust. And so she and I became dear friends. And I was trained by her, certified under John Jay College of Criminal Justice program that she set up for advocacy, ADA advocacy for litigants with invisible disabilities. I don't want to give the impression today that I'm an attorney, because I am not an attorney. And I do not do actual quote unquote litigation, but I do advocate for litigants with invisible disabilities. So that's what I do. That's the bulk of what I do. I enjoy going into court. As a matter of fact, I'm getting ready to do a video today. It's an earth-shattering video that I have a transcript of a judge telling a disabled litigant, quote, "I will hold a gun to your head." And this is going on in courts across America. And this is going to be just a jaw-dropping video that I'm gonna put out today. But I run into this kind of corruption all the time. It's odd to get this on the record like this, but this is what we have all the time. Judges threatening, and it's not just judges. We're going to cover we're going to do an overview today, but that's kind of how I got into this, because I had my own court stuff with losing a house at 85% equity that I just didn't know how to deal with. And looking back on it, I didn't have ADA access, and I didn't claim it at the time because I didn't know. And so that's what's that's what's catalyzed to all of the judges who stomped on my neck and held me down. Thank you, because you have created a monster. And I'm here today in your honor, actually in your honor, because my goal is to turn your system upside down. So that's why I'm here.
And I so appreciate Jay's experience. It's very different from mine. He definitely has way more experience in the courtroom. I have a JD, but I'm not licensed. The bulk of my experience, as Paul had said, was actually doing EEOC cases with the federal government. I worked for the government, so I represented the government in EEOC cases. I was on the other side of this that I am now, and I pretty much did everything an attorney did. You don't have to have a JD to be in those employee and labor relations positions. So I actually quit the government when we're in those times where the deep state really started to come down in, and I was being asked to do things that I wasn't comfortable with, that were, frankly, in my opinion, illegal. And I said, yep, nope, I'm out. And so I ended up actually going to law school, not because of the ADA stuff, but because of another area I felt called to go and learn about the law, but it was still within the constitutional common law realm. So, but as I said, my sister, she became a type 1 diabetic at 9 years old, which is fairly typical. She was actually older than me, and she lost her sight at 19. And I just saw what she went through, which was nothing horrible, but she handled it with such grace, and she was able to advocate for herself in such an effective way. And I really learned from that. And I really just saw her strength. And she was my hero. I just looked up to her, and I was so enamored at how well she did. And so I always wanted to help people do that. I wanted to help people be able to navigate the system and successfully, and with grace and with dignity and all of that. So that's really kind of what drove my passion for, helping folks with disabilities to access the system, because it's not evident. You'll find out today. Most people do not know they've got access to the Americans with Disabilities Act, especially if you have, an invisible type of disability. And we'll get into this, but the 2008 amendments to the law really broadened it for all of us. So Jay will explain today how basically this really does apply. And what's happened with the COVID madness, the vaccine mandates are just blatant violations from start to go on the ADA. So it's been quite the education the last year and a half. So, oh, you're muted, Jay.
Thank you. Sorry.
That's okay.
I want to ask you, if you, I know my experience, but I want to ask you, I don't think we ever talked about this, but have you seen any stark turnarounds once you introduce the ADA into a situation for somebody else?
Yes, I can't say recently. It seems like recently people are organizations, not people, but employers, schools, public access, store, they're doubling down. But in the past, I have, in my previous experience, once the ADA came into the picture, you sat up a little straighter and you paid a little bit more attention, and you made sure that if you were going to proceed, all your I's were dotted and your T's were crossed. So,
well, for those of you listening, I when I was going through training, as somebody with PTSD, I get distracted easily, and also I get disinterested when I'm not feeling like I'm uh, in a situation that's very productive. And so I was going through this training, and I was having all this crisis going on at the same time. And about 2/3 of the way through this, I thought, I really I don't think it's going to make a difference. I don't know that I want to do this, and I almost quit. And Dr. Huffer encouraged me to continue. And man, what a difference it has made. When I go in to a courtroom and tell a judge, you have to give my client ADA rights. You can't coerce, intimidate, threaten, or interfere with them. And oh, by the way, judge, you do not have immunity. It's a game changer. And yeah, they look at you like a frog in a hailstorm. Yeah.
Yep.
Because you're telling them what to do, and they're used to being the ones saying what goes on. And so it's for those of you listening, I'm going to go. Is it okay if I go ahead and start on an intro?
Absolutely.
Okay, so first of all, what is a disability? And I have people asking me this all the time, and I want to delineate that what we're talking about today is the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Amendments Act of 2008 and the final rule implementation of the CFR. So what happens is people confuse sometimes this with Social Security disability, SSDI, SSI. That's not what this is. What we're doing is helping people get equal access as someone with a disability. This has nothing to do with payments from the government or anything like that. So when and people often ask, what is a disability? Well, a disability is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And it's also a record of having one of those disabilities, such as somebody who's had tuberculosis or cancer that's in remission or something that was formerly afflicting them, and they had to use that. And then it's also being regarded as having one of those disabilities, including when someone treats you like you have a disability and therefore they're going to make you do some type of an act to prove that you don't have a disability or accommodate that disability that they just assumed and regarded you as having. This is what we've had with COVID. And so, also, this is important, physiological conditions that create a substantial limitation can be a physical or mental impairment. So, what we have is in today's society, we have a lot of people setting up these physiological conditions that I call it the ADA two-step. And by the way, I have a Substack. It's adarights.substack.com, and I've got a lot of articles there about stuff like this. But what happens is someone will create a regarded as disability, and unfortunately, in the law, that in and of itself is not fully. And I'm not giving legal advice here, but to my understanding, that's not illegal. But then they use that disability that they created to discriminate against the people that they're foisting that disability upon. And that is the part that violates the ADA. So, and because they've done it in a two-step process, it's harder to connect it unless, you know this information. So that's what we're trying to give out today. Excuse me. So, I'm going to let Chris speak to Title I, but I got into this doing court stuff because Dr. Huffer has a book that she used for our textbook called Unlocking Justice. And it talks about how the court system is just still inaccessible to people. There's also a case, Tennessee versus Lane, and the site for that is 541 US 509. It's a 2004 case, Supreme Court case. And it actually says in it that these denials of access are continuing today. Sorry, I got lost there on the train of thought. And it is, I feel like it's getting worse. And so we're going to have to stand up. And here's another catch on this. Thank you to Todd Callender for hosting this. I want to be very grateful for that. And also, I've had now some time with Todd and spent time with him, and I'm encouraged by his attitude on how he wants to change things. I've spoken with William Gorin, the guy who writes the book for the American Bar Association called Understanding the ADA, and he says that lawyers are afraid to take this stuff on because of threats of disbarment and other proceedings. So holding a judge accountable in a courtroom is not something that a lawyer is going to do for you if they realize, and most of them will realize, that this is a suicide march. And so if we need to bleep that word out, we can. But telling a judge as a lawyer, Judge, you have to give them ADA rights and you don't have any immunity about this. And by the way, you can't threaten me or my client. I can do that easier, and so can Chris, because she's not a lawyer. We can do that easier as an advocate than a lawyer can do it. So when I go in and work with clients that have lawyers already, I tell them right off the bat, you're going to have to make me the bad guy because I'm going to be the bad guy. And so what's happening is across America in state court, and this is rampant in family court. Family court is already stomping on people left and right, and also schools. Schools will, there's all kinds of twists and turns in navigating school access, and I'll let
absolutely.
Yeah. So the 504, I've done articles on this, but the 504 is outdated when it comes to access related entry to programs that the school is offering. So the ADA Amendments Act is what governs on that. Chris, I'll let you talk for a while if you want to.
And what Jay was referencing there was Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which schools relied on and still are relying on prior to the 2008 amendments, even though the Department of Education, the federal Department of Education, pretty much told them they must change their policies and adapt to the new legal standard that was brought out by the 2008 amendments. Schools are still touting the 504, Section 504, which basically they want you to go through their analysis to determine whether or not you have a disability. Again, Section 2 or the amendments to 2008 amendments are what is in place now, but the schools really are almost just flat out ignoring that fact. And it's partly, I think it's because, and Jay can weigh in on this, but if they acknowledge it, their whole house of cards comes crumbling down. So we're actually, and there isn't really any case law on this particular point. So it needs to be made so that it can be very clearly outlined, hopefully by the court. But so, Jay, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. So the what the difference between Section 504 for a school, at least, the difference between, and I guess any government, any state and local government agency under Title II of the ADA, the difference between the 504 requirements and the ADA requirements, ADA Amendments Act requirements, is that it prohibits coercion, intimidation, threats, and interference. It also removes immunity under 42 U.S. Code 12202, which they do not like. I mean, you go in and tell a state actor that they don't have any immunity concerning this and they can be dragged into federal court. It does change the dynamic quite a bit, especially for a judge who is accustomed to having immunity. It puts them in an administrative spot. And then there's one other one. The extensive analysis piece. So under Section 504, they want to do an evaluation, is what they call it, and they ask for all kinds of information on this. And I've had parents tell me that the school will actually call their doctor and intimidate their doctor to change their wording on whatever documentation they've given, so that the student doesn't have access. And this is just, I mean, this is what goes on behind the scenes. The people who are supposed to be protecting the rights of the people using the services are not doing that. So when people go into court, nine times out of 10, they're going to need an advocate if they use ADA, because the courts are going to look at them and laugh or confuse them worse, which is typical. So that's what we got going on.
Yeah. So as Jay said, there's Title I, Title II. Title I is employment, and that's really where my kind of specialty is in terms of just most about the bulk of my experience. And it's probably the area that most people are familiar. Most people are more familiar with the employment aspect of it. So ADA and the Rehabilitation Act, if you work for the federal government, you're actually not covered technically by ADA. You're covered by the Rehabilitation Act. Private sector is ADA covered. Employers must accommodate either an applicant or an employee with a reasonable accommodation, as long as it doesn't constitute what the law says is an undue burden on the employer. Undue burden is dependent on the size of the employer. What may be an undue burden on a small employer that's got 10 employees will not be an undue burden on CVS or some huge corporation. So that undue burden portion is basically if you've got a case where you're saying you haven't been accommodated and the employer is saying, well, it's causing an undue burden. They've got the burden of proving that, but that standard is based on a lot of different things that are factored into that with regard to the size of the employer, the nature of the business, the type of accommodation you're wanting, and whether or not it causes them additional costs, impacts on other employees. There's a whole bunch of different things that factor into that. But what we've been doing at DRA is again with the vaccine mandates, is those people that have put forward a medical exemption. Now we can get into that medical exemption. The word exemption isn't found under the ADA, but basically these employers are just tossing out the exemptions without even considering the person's underlying medical condition. So it ends up being a bigger issue. Oops, my computer just said it's going to shut down. Hang on a minute, I got to plug in.
I'll
while I plug in.
That's okay. That's good. I hear your dog snoring or growling or something. Growling. But it may be my voice being in your house. Who knows? But nonetheless, Title I. It's a real navigation field, and I'm thankful there are people like DRA out there doing that. I enjoy Title I cases, but my main thrust, my main desired place to be is Title II, and then Title I, and then Title III. But Title II, carrying on from what Chris was talking about, Title II is state and local governments. So state and local governments are subject to the ADA, and they have to provide their services, programs, and activities without discrimination. And there are a lot of requirements in this for them. And they don't like it when you bring this up. They'll gladly put a poster on their wall and in some obscure place going down the hallway of a courthouse. But when you bring up the ADA, it actually throws a wrench into the system of let's roll over these people quickly. And that's what needs to happen because people are being rolled over quickly and not getting justice. So, and then Title III is public accommodations. And that's for like your stores, your Walmarts, your, they're even including websites on this now. But we
hit up against Title III with the mask mandates were a biggie on Title III because people would
Sprouts.
Yep, hit the doorway and they'd say, "Where's your mask?" And they'd say, "I've got a disability or a medical reason not to have them," and they'd either not let them in the store or create a big ruckus. So yeah.
And I helped with some of those cases, and honestly, those are cases that you're going to have to go into court with to get remedy. And 9 times out of 10. And so people say, well, the lawyers need to step up. Well, actually, you need to step up. And so there are courses online. I'm not going to do a free promotion today. There are courses online on how to do. And actually, no, it's not Todd. It's somebody else. It's Sean McMillan. I will plug him. Sean McMillan gives a lot of information out about how to do civil rights for pro se and unrepresented litigants. And so that's and he's a great guy. And so that's a free plug for him today. But the responsibility for your rights. You do not have rights. I'll say this: you do not have rights unless you are willing to enforce them. Period. That's just how it works. So.
Yep. Yeah, and the bulk of these situations are going to start in an administrative process, which is why, again, I don't necessarily need to have a license, a bar license, to represent people at the beginning, at the front end of these. So for disabled rights advocates, folks will start off with me in EEOC process. I can represent them at the EEOC process. Don't need to have a bar attorney. And then if it gets to the point where you get your notice of right to sue, you've been unsuccessful with the EOC, and you decide to go to district court, then we kick it over to a barred attorney. But the administrative processes I don't even need a JD. You can have anybody represent you in those particular processes. So they're a little less intimidating. They're definitely less intimidating if you are going to go it alone in a pro se. And a lot like the court cases, the administrative judges in those situations are supposed to sort of help you along if you are doing pro se. So yeah, anyway.
It's man, I tell you, the deal with going into court and facing just a court. There's a book by Judith Herman. She's a MD, and there's a book called Trauma and Recovery. And she says that people, if one set out by design to create a system for provoking post-traumatic symptoms, one could not do better than a court of law. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we have today, and that's really what we're fighting against. So how do we move forward with using the ADA to get us equal access? Well, I would say the first step is to invoke it. And so people say, well, how do you invoke it? Well, it's just like invoking the Fifth Amendment. I'm claiming my rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And then you can, depending on what prong of the definition of disability you're using, you can ask for reasonable accommodations. And those are things that you can do to help you get equal access where you would not have equal access if you didn't have them. So that's the next step of that. And then after that, and how do you ask for this? Well, most places in employment, Title I, they're going to have HR. Title II is going to be what we call, through slang, it's a ADA coordinator. It's designated responsible employee is what the ADA says. If an entity has more than 50 employees, like a court or a county, they have to have an ADA coordinator. And so you go to that ADA coordinator, and they're supposed to help you get these ADA accommodations. What I have observed regularly, and am still observing, is that they are just another roadblock in the system of gaining equal access. They're actually just running front door for the court to hinder you. And so then it has to escalate. And I've had people tell me, well, you've got to go ask the judge. They tell me I have to do that. Now, I don't know if you've ever been accused of UPO, but I get accused of it all the time. Matter of fact, sometimes I'll encourage a court to pursue charges of unauthorized practice of law against me so that I can have standing to challenge it. And they always back away from it because as someone with a right to aid and encourage, they can't coerce, intimidate, threaten, or interfere. And that's exactly what they're doing when they say, you can't help this person. Mm-hmm. So I pointed out to a court, I can't remember which court it was. It was just, the last day or so. There's no demarcation line here. There's no demarcation line on when I can aid and encourage someone. And so to tell someone you can have aid and encouragement all the way up until this point, and after that, you cannot have this aid and encouragement. Mm-hmm. Well, that's interference. And so, I get to go into court with them, and I don't get to speak to the substantive matters of their case. But what I do get to do is speak to their ability to participate, keep them centered, help them focus, take breaks if they need to, all of this stuff. And boy, it just drives them up the wall. They can't stand it. Have you ever been accused of UPL?
I have not.
Well, the letters behind your name probably help. But
Yeah, no, an administrative. I have had it recently, though. I thought this was interesting. I had my first CEO case where I was the main representative. Dawn was sort of alternate. The judge wouldn't speak to me because there was a barred attorney.
Oh, wow.
She made basically Dawn take the lead. And I was like, that was the first time I'd ever had that happen. And I don't know exactly what prompted it. But I was not allowed to speak to anything having anything to do with law, with the law. I could speak on procedures or whatever. And I'm like, so there's an assumption there that I don't, apparently, that they're making. Again, am I being regarded as being a dummy and not knowing the law? I don't know, but they don't realize I have 20 years of administrative EEOC law. So it's
I get disrespected all the time, Chris. Just so you know, you're not in the boat by yourself. I try to give it to them first, and that sounds problematic. What I always do though is I give people a chance to get off of the bridge before I throw a match on it. So I go in with kindness. Yeah. I say, look, here we are. We're invoking the ADA. We're asking for ADA accommodations, and their normal response is, well, you don't get to do that. And so once they do that, it's on. So,
yeah. Well, we have a couple comments that have come into the chat so far and some questions. So I'd love if we could dive into those if y'all are ready.
Sure.
First comment is actually from Bruce McGray, who is, you may have seen Bruce on his Wednesday morning encouragement prayer hour, which is 8:30 a.m. every Wednesday morning Eastern time. And he is an FAA whistleblower. And Bruce says, Jay and Chris, thank you for doing this today. There are at least a couple of us on with you who immediately need advice on properly and quickly filing under ADA protection for legitimate physical disabilities who need protection in the federal workplace. So how can we assist Bruce there? Where shall we say that?
That's my specialty, the federal workplace. So yeah, go ahead and get a hold of me for sure.
Okay, so Chris, we'll connect you with Bruce directly. Thank you. The next question, the first question, actually, it's question statement. Please repeat the statute that does apply to federal workers instead of the ADA. There was a statute mentioned earlier.
The Rehabilitation Act of 1973.
Yep.
But say that again.
It's the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And there's section 504 and section 508. Those are of particular importance.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, now next question that we've got here. Can you help me get on disability with Social Security?
No, and that's something that we wanted to cover on this, is that this is not that kind of a disability advocacy piece. We support you getting the benefits that you're entitled to, but what we're trying to do is help people with disability access state and local government systems. Now, I will say this, state systems run the SSI programs and SSDI programs. So if you're going into a state office to apply for SSDI and SSI, there are some nuances that you can use. And I say this with a smile on my face because I don't really think that I can get into this as much time as it needs. But there are some nuances you can use to make sure that you get equal access in that process of applying for disability through Social Security. So you can
cover that in the next show or another show. That can be a good topic.
While I've got it on my head, can I throw this out real quick?
Please.
One of the things that you can do when you're applying for Social Security is you can ask for someone to help you complete the paperwork. If you have trouble with paperwork, like I did, you can ask for someone to help you with paperwork. Now, I'm not on disability now, but I was on it at one point in time, and I asked for someone to help me complete the paperwork. And so they were writing down the answers based on the communication we were having over the phone. And that actually puts them on the spot to write down the correct thing, if you think about it. Mm-hmm. So I was approved in 30 days.
Wow.
So just a tip.
Thank you. Very helpful for our audience. Next question is, my ex is using my disability against me in court. Is this against the ADA?
if they're using your disability against you in court, they're all the time calling you crazy and telling you that you need to get a psych eval, that kind of thing. Yeah, that's the time to invoke the ADA big time. And I work with this a lot in my field, and it's it's an awkward situation, especially if you have a lawyer, because lawyers are afraid to use the ADA. But that's where working with an advocate can help out, because I can be the bad guy. And it's something that you can use to stop the discrimination, stop the constant barrage of coercion and intimidation that's coming from the ex. And I'll tell you this too. A lot of times there are kids that are in the middle of this that are overlooked. And I've actually had a guardian ad litem, an officer of the court, to after I wrote them a letter at the allowance of a lawyer I was working with. I mean, I okayed it through the lawyer I was working with on this case. And we were both upset that the guardian ad litem was just so obviously ignoring the disabilities of the child in this case. He said, have at it. Go write him a letter. So I wrote the court and the GAL a letter and said, you're without immunity. You're excluding the child on the basis of disability. It's been reported to you this child has a disability, and you are actively denying them equal access to your services, programs, and activities. The GAL filed an immediate motion to withdraw, which is what we wanted. The judge, however, said, no. Let's have a hearing, because the judge and the GAL were apparently friends that we were observing. So they have a hearing, which frustrated us. But the GAL hired, this is an attorney. Most of the time, a GAL is an attorney. Not always, but most of the time. So the GAL hired their own attorney, brought the attorney to court, got on the stand. When the attorney for my client started questioning this GAL, the GAL said, I'm invoking my right under the Fifth Amendment to abstain from answering on the, and because I had written this letter. And so the attorney called me and said, your letter did that. And that was just a huge success. That I mean, honestly, you can bring the ADA to bear in cases, but you have to do it in a way that, and I find this odd to say because I spent so many years fighting lawyers, but I'm here to protect the lawyers, because I really would like to build a bridge between the legal industry and actual justice. And that's been destroyed. And recently I went to a conference where I saw a whole ballroom full of attorneys acknowledge there's something terribly wrong and we have to fix it. And it's on you as well. I'm telling people it's on their shoulders to handle their own rights. But as a legal professional, you have a duty to help with this. And it may not be comfortable, but somebody's got to step out. And there are a few people who have done it. So I'm going to encourage you to do that.
Absolutely. That is a great reminder. Thank you, Jay. Next question. The court is using my disability against me. Can I sue them?
So if the court's using your disability against you, I will encourage you to invoke the ADA, but also involve an advocate. Because if a court's taking your disability, bringing it into court and using it against you, there are privacy protections that are in Title 1, 2, and 3 of the ADA. And that destroys the privacy that you should have. Privacy and independence is what it says you're supposed to have when they provide auxiliary aids and services. So if they're providing their services to you and they're destroying your privacy and independence and also discriminating against you, coercing, intimidating, threatening, and interfering, then 42 U.S. Code 12202 and Tennessee versus Lane says that they lose immunity for that. So yes, that's the short answer is yes, but you do it with an advocate, in my opinion, because it's subjective space versus objective space. So if I'm fighting my own stuff, even I've done this for years. I've self-advocated for years because I feel like I'm the best at what I do, and I'm not selling myself. I've just immersed myself into trying to have equal access, and I've had to do it the hard way, the very hard way. But I still have problems when I self-advocate. My speech is affected. I have to stop and think. Sometimes I have to remove myself. I get the fight flight, thing, and I have to remove myself and come back to it. But so if you're in that subjective space where you're dealing with your own stuff, you're going to have a lot more mental clutter and inaccessibility to your cognitive space You need an advocate to be with you, and that's where one can come in and help.
Very helpful. Chris, do you have anything that you'd like to add? I certainly don't want to.
No, I was just going to say there's very few people like Jay out there in terms of advocates. And so we've got, in my opinion, the best here. You've got access to the best here in terms of what he does and how he does it. And in these situations, you do need a bulldog. And Jay's a bulldog, and I appreciate that. And yeah, so it's one of those things. He made a comment earlier in terms of invoking your rights and which prong. I wanted to just kind of clarify what prong. The prongs that he was talking about was, again, what he mentioned earlier, which was which prong of the ADA are you invoking? Are you invoking I have a disability that is recorded? I have a record of a disability, maybe in the past, or I'm being regarded as having a disability. So when he talked about the three prongs and which one you invoke, those are the three prongs that he was talking about. And again, the biggest, there's a huge aspect of this regarded as having to do with COVID and the vaccine. And Jay actually said it brilliantly the other day when we were meeting. And I recognized it early on when I came in. I'm like, they're regarding people as disabled. They're regarding them as having some, being some threat in the workplace. So you've got some disease, even though you don't, as an unvaccinated person. And we need to change that. And it was one of those things kind of hard to articulate, but Jay did it the other day very brilliantly, is they are regarding you as your immune system is inadequate, right? So they're basically saying you're disabled. You don't have a strong immune system, and you must take our accommodation, which is the vaccine. And again, when you look at it through that lens, it's absolutely you're being regarded as, and they can't force their accommodation on you in that regard. So there's a lot of nuances to this, and especially I think in the court realm, from Jay's perspective, maybe not quite as nuanced in the employment realm. It's fairly straightforward about what their obligations are to someone once they invoke the ADA and say that they have a condition and they're covered by the ADA. So
Thank you, Chris. And you're both a wealth of knowledge, and we're so grateful that you're both here to join us and to host this every week. So thank you again.
Thanks for the opportunity. It's an area that it does need to come out. People do need to understand that they've got probably way more rights than they even realize that they have in that regard. So
exactly. And there are so many questions that are coming in about this specifically. So we are so happy that we can provide this to our community. We have another question that came in. Is ADHD a disability?
Almost anything that substantially limits a major life activity can be classified as a disability. Under the regarded as prong, there's a transitory and minor qualification, which means that if it doesn't last for 6 months, then it could be excluded, or if it's minor. But there's actually, when I was looking through Goran's blog last night to kind of familiarize myself with some stuff I'm getting ready to do with a judge in Nevada. And a person's testimony can document that they have a disability. There's actually no requirement that they have a doctor's note that they have a disability. So that's a something to consider. Does a doctor's note help? Yes. And do you have to prove it to the state court? No. They'll oftentimes ask you for proof. They'll ask a doctor to sign an ADA form for accommodations, and this is not something that you have to do. ADHD, because it affects the ability to think, concentrate, communicate, and interact with others, can definitely be a disability. So that's definitely something that you could use as a disability. And as for accommodations, I need to take breaks. I need to have CART, which is computer-aided real-time transcription. I'm saying that wrong because I've done that all along, but CART stands for real-time transcription service, and I'm not sure. I can't remember what the first two words of that acronym are, but and then that puts the words up in front of you as they're happening in court, and you can ask for that transcript after the court hearing, and then also you can ask for the right to record, and that's recording is actually listed as an accommodation or an auxiliary aid and service under Title II. So a lot of times they'll say, well, you can't do that. That fundamentally alters the nature of the court. Well, no, it doesn't, because the court's already recording. So, how do you know to argue this stuff? Well, I'm here to help, but honestly, look at this video. This is what we're putting this stuff out for. And if you have to do it yourself, educate yourself as much as you can. And if you can't do that, then definitely get someone involved, like disability rights advocates or myself. And there are others out here that are doing it. I'm on a case right now with another couple of advocates that are just fine people. And so that's my answer for that.
Right.
And I'd like to just pipe in what, just briefly, what's considered a major life activity. And it can be just about anything: breathing, sleeping, learning, when you're talking about schools, working, concentrating. The Tennessee v. Lane case was normal cell growth, something that interferes with normal cell growth. In that particular case, the person she had the MDR, not the MDR, the breast cancer gene that they know causes breast cancer that's hereditary. And she had a mastectomy. She was fired for taking the time off to do that. And the employer tried to argue that, well, it was voluntary on her part. She chose to do that. And the courts came back and said, no, because she had the gene, and it would interfere with her normal cell growth, that the treatment she decided to do, her accommodation to that, was to remove her, to have the mastectomy. So it can be fairly obscure, as long as you can say it does affect some aspect of your life that's a normal activity, daily activity, then more than likely you're going to be able to say that there's some effect. Your disability has some effect on your life activity. So I don't, Jay has anything to add to that, but I just kind of wanted to.
What was that? Was that the Darby versus Childvine case instead of the Tennessee?
That's the yeah. Sorry, not Tennessee v. Lane. Yeah, that was the Darby case. So
and they said in that case too that was the first time they had seen that argument at the appeals level. So I will say this: the ADA is widely available and severely underused. So it's available, but not many people use it.
Yeah.
So
and in that case, you probably would have to have the gene, the documentation of having that gene, because we do have, with regard to the vaccine issues, if your family has a big history of autoimmune issues, and there are some genetic autoimmune things that pass on, and you're saying, I don't want to take these vaccines because I don't want to trigger that. It's one of those things where, again, you don't necessarily need the documentation, but you're going to end up probably getting to that point, especially if you're arguing something like normal cell growth or something like that. So it is very broad. It is very broad.
Well, thank you for expanding upon that. So I think we're going to know the answer to the next question, but just this one came in. I have a child who is autistic. Is autism considered a disability?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
Think about how that impacts that child's normal daily routine, your routine, that child's daily routine and their normal life activities. Absolutely.
This is something that affects them on many levels. And I will also point this out while we're on this question. This is something that's greatly overlooked. Parents of autistic children have also a secondary disability because of their child. And this is something that, if you get an autistic child that's in a situation where there's a lot of high energy or flashing lights, like a cop interaction, it can cause, or a child with seizures even, that has a trigger from that. There can be all kinds of stressors on the parent, and the parent needs to have some type of documentation that says, I'm invoking the ADA. I'm asking for you to notch this down a little bit. Maybe get the designated responsible employee / ADA coordinator involved, And be careful that you're not asking for medical intervention. States like Florida, you don't want them to do the Baker Act deal on you. But for a parent, having a child with a disability, any kind of a disability, is a stressor on that parent. And when they're trying to navigate through situations, that parent cannot as effectively be in an objective space because it's subjective to them as well. So they're fighting, their child's fighting, they're trying to fight on their child's behalf. I mean, I've done this before. And, going into situations like just going to the hospital for childbirth, that's a situation where it amps up. With a child with a disability, though, parents need to be cognizant of the fact that they have disability rights as well, because they are aiding and encouraging another in the exercise and enjoyment of their rights. And therefore, they need to know their rights under the ADA as well.
Wow. Yep. That is excellent information. Thank you. I'm sure that a lot of people were not aware of that. I certainly wasn't. So thank you for expanding. Another question that we had that came in is, as a foreigner, can the ADA provision for me the ability to travel to America without being vaccinated? Biden's mandates currently restrict me from traveling to America unvaccinated.
I thought that was just lifted, first of all, but yeah, the ADA, I mean, it is really sort of an international, I want to say notion, law. I mean, there are typically laws in the other countries that are comparable to it. And go, Jay. You were going to talk. You were going to say something.
I want to say that it's a long shot to use the ADA to escape this, but right. That's because, first of all, if it's a federal mandate, it would be Rehabilitation Act rather than, and then that's going to be something that we're going to say, the courts are going to say, do you have standing to claim that since you're a foreigner trying to enter? And there are some hurdles there. But there are, I think we talked with Todd the other day about this. There's a UN provision that talks about the interconnectability of, to coin a word, of the rights of people with disabilities among the nations. So the law of nations, maybe something like that. But I'm not an expert in that field at all. So that's a good question. I don't have a complete answer to it, but I would tend to think not.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So next question that's come in, do OSHA, that's OSHA, and the EEOC work together?
Not typically. Okay. Not typically. I haven't ever seen a case where there's really been any kind of overlap with regard to the administrative bodies, adjudicative bodies, in that regard. So.
Okay. Now, next question that's come in here. Let's see. Can I be allowed, or I guess claim, my exemption from all vaccines under the ADA?
It depends. That depends. Yeah, I mean, you can if, again, you've got some underlying medical condition that is going to prevent you from, or be exacerbated, and your accommodation. Jay goes into this with regard to, my mind just went blank on the terminology, what we were talking about yesterday. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you've got, and it doesn't, there is a transitory nature to some, to the regarded as Jay mentioned, it has to be more than 6 months. However, if you've got an autoimmune issue like seasonal allergies that are debilitating for 3 months of the year, as long as it is every year that you suffer that, or every time you get a vaccine, it triggers that, that can be a chronic condition. It doesn't last for 6 months every time it happens, but it happens yearly. Right. So in terms of looking at the transitory nature of things, there's a couple of, there's that sort of that caveat in there. It may affect you only part of the year, but if it's every year and it's triggered by something and you behavioral modification, my mind just went to, Jay can expound on that, but you have adapted your your life to not have that trigger, then avoiding vaccines, because it triggers either an autoimmune issue or some sort of a recurring adverse event. Typically, when you get vaccines and you have an adverse event, it doesn't get better with the next vaccine. They can try to give you Benadryl or different whatever, but the systemic effects of that vaccine typically do not get better every vaccine. It's going to get worse. So,
right. Thank you for that,
Jay,
Jay,
fill in my brain fart.
First of all, I have to say, I am incessantly yawning during this thing, and I'm acknowledging that that's a disability response, because I'm in a heightened awareness space here, and I'm probably not breathing as much as I would because I'm focusing on what's going on. And so, I mean, it to me, I'm like, well, what's going on? But I realize it. So I'm letting everybody know I'm not bored. I'm excited to be here, but I'm yawning, and it's because I'm in a space. The learned behavioral modification.
There it is. Learn behavior. There, and I knew it.
thank you for clarifying that for us, Jay. We were very
Sometimes my learned behavioral modification is to explain what's going on with me, just like I did.
Absolutely.
And sometimes I can say, I need time to slow down here because I can't process that as quick in this setting as someone else can.
But tell them about your elevator example, because I think that explains it.
So someone with claustrophobia may say, I'm not riding on an elevator at all. That's my learned behavior modification. Or they may say, if there's an elevator with 2 or more people on it, I'm not riding on it at all. Or maybe 1 or more people. If there's an empty elevator, I can handle it for 7 floors.
Mm-hmm.
That'll help me not take stairs. It becomes a weighing out of the options here. But those are learned behavioral modifications. And so for people with situations like what Chris was talking about, autoimmune and so forth, the learned behavioral modification of avoiding triggers is a big deal. I mean, people with PTSD and other, I'm acknowledging other systems like autoimmune, we learn to avoid the things that cause our disabilities to be exacerbated.
Yeah.
And so with PTSD, I call it TAME: threat assessment, mitigation, and elimination. And so it's a cycle that I stay in pretty much all the time. I'm looking, what's that? How's that work? What's that? Is that against me? And it's not a paranoia thing. It's a, how do I maintain the highest level of my cognizant ability without having to deal with some other threat that's coming on?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a learned behavioral modification. And so like going back to the parents with the autism thing, the children with disabilities, there needs to be a learned behavioral modification of preparing documentation beforehand to get. I mean, I carry a card with me in my van. If I get pulled over, first thing is going out the window before a driver license is, I'm invoking the Americans with Disabilities Act. I'm happy to give them a license, and I'm familiar with the First Amendment auditors that say, I don't have to do that unless I'm not there to fight, okay, and I don't have any warrants that I know of, and I just got pulled over recently,
Okay.
so I hand out that card and my driver license. I let them run their stuff, and it says, I want to talk to your ADA coordinator, and they don't know what to do at that point in time. There's another situation of the frog in a hailstorm.
Wow.
And so they look at this, and I've got all the sites on there, tell them I'm an ADA advocate, got my card at the bottom of it, and the guy says, here, I'm giving you a warning, your headlight's out, and I had a short in my headlight, and he said, have a nice day. So and it went much smoother, and I keep a camera running during that time. There's all kinds of mitigators that are learned behavioral modifications for me. I carry this around with me all the time as another recorder that I use. I've got I don't have it on me right now, but I got a body cam that I wear on this vest, and I can just hit a button and boom, it's recording either audio or video, and that helps me. Those are learned behavioral modifications.
Well, thank you for that information. Thank you both for your time today and for sharing with our audience, with our Vax Choice community. And we're just about out of time. So Chris, Jay, anything that you'd like to close with?
No, I'm just really excited to be able to present the information to folks and to educate people on, and again, like I said with my sister, be able to educate people so that they can navigate with grace and dignity, and push back when somebody is actually, impeding them, and interfering with their access to whatever system it is that they're trying to get access to. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm excited to delve into the different issues in future episodes, and to hear everybody's questions, and just be able to educate.
Thank you, Chris.
I want to say that you have more rights than you think you do, and if you're interfacing with the system at all, investigate what your ADA rights are and use them.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for closing with that. So I'd like to remind everyone, if you haven't already, please visit us at vaxchoice.com, subscribe to our newsletter, follow us on our social media channels at VaxChoice. This is presented today by VaxChoice, and our hosts are the Disabled Right Advocates firm. That is dradvocates.com. So you can go ahead and send an email on that website. If you have questions on anything that you've seen today, if you need some assistance, please do reach out to Todd's firm there. We're going to be bringing in some other rotating hosts who have specific expertise in areas as we go through this series. As Chris mentioned, we're going to be having discussions on employment, vaccines, education. So in the next couple of days, we'll have the announcement coming out about what the focus is for next week. So please join us every Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern time, right here at VaxChoice. And we thank you again. And also one more shout out to our team in the background. We have Greg, who is our streaming producer, and it takes quite a bit to put this for all of y'all. And we have Brendan in the background who's moderating, and we have Jonathan and Lisa as well. And then, of course, a big thank you to Todd for bringing this idea out and providing this platform so that we can give this information to you fine folks. So enjoy your day, and we'll see you soon.
See you, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.